of mythology and movement, appreciating the rich history of yoga asanas. Welcome, my name is Sufyan, and this is a sample truncated lecture of what I would be holding as part of my course run in Yoga Plus Studio come September. So, if you are interested, this would be a good sort of introduction to the kind of lectures that you will be getting as part of the course. Otherwise, if you're just here just to watch and learn a little bit more, go ahead, kick back, relax, and explore the aspects of yoga which may not necessarily be covered in a group yoga class. All right, so let's go. Mythology. Let us explore what mythology is to begin with. Mythology comes from the Greek root word or the two words, and that would be the mythos and logos. So these two words, the mythos means the story of the people, and the logos, it would actually mean word or speech. So here, essentially, when we put them together, the word mythology would actually mean the spoken story of the people. And that would encapsulate all the fables, all the myths, all the stories, the sacred tales of a particular group or a particular culture, we're talking about the universal aspects of the human condition. And interestingly, the most important part of a myth is not about the story itself, but that generally the stories are a way of transmitting knowledge and also to explain people to within and without the group of how they would live their lives, why they would do and carry out things the way they would do it as such, and also to understand how their or what their perspective of the world is. So, recurring themes in mythologies or in stories across traditions, across religions are plenty. For today, I will be looking at just highlighting three of the more popular ones that we can immediately identify with. The very first one would be the theme of good and evil. So, good and evil, or rather, good versus evil, when we think about that, immediately we can think of stories, we can think of fables that have this element of the theme, right? Where good triumphs over evil. In religion, in most cases, we always have this dilemma of choice. And in this dilemma of choice, the idea of morality and ethics would come into play. Typically in yoga, or I guess by extension in Hinduism, the story of Mahabharata or the Bhagavad Gita within the Mahabharata would come to mind immediately when we think about this particular theme. The second theme, it's on human suffering, and suffering of the human soul. We know is always makes a good story, especially when we think about uh, crafting tales or creating stories to discuss the cultivation of good moral values. In religion, we look particularly in stories where the higher power, God, or the universal being gives human um, this trials and tribulations for us as humans to endeavor and to come out stronger from it. So that's the theme of human suffering, which is pretty common. The final popular theme that I would like to tap into or discuss today would be the life and death. And this, you know that through stories and fables, we are guided in a way to think about our lives, more specifically thinking about the main purpose or the goal of our lives. And once again, in religion or in the context of religion, these stories would also tap into the temporality of life and question about our existence, question of the choices that we make in our lives. The beauty about these traditions, these religions and cultures is that there might be one singular theme that cuts across different traditions, different religions, but they all have very different approaches. One of them would be the theme of the origins of the universe. That would be a very good example because um, for starters, the Greeks believed that the universe started as an empty darkness. In the Abrahamic religions like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, there is this idea of creationism with Adam and Eve, or with this singular man and woman present in the origins of the world. And in Hinduism, which is what we are going to be focusing on because of its connection to yoga, in a particular text within Hinduism called the Brahma Purana, there is also this idea of the first woman and the first man, Shatarupa and Manu, the men, being created by the god of creation, that would be Brahma. So as you can see, there are a number of approaches to see one singular theme, and these stories and these fables would shed some light as to what people within a group or within a tribe would think about it. And in Hinduism, as with yoga, these stories, these fables, these mythologies are all codified and put together into what we call a set of literature called the Hindu epics and the Puranas. Hindu epics and Puranas, I think you might be familiar with it without even knowing it, because we hear of these, of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata quite often. And those are the two of the more popular Hindu epics that we would come across. Puranas, okay, so sorry, about the Hindu epics, a little bit more about the Ramayana and Mahabharata before we go further into the Puranas. Epics refer to is actually essentially a long poem that is derived from oral traditions, narrating the deeds or the actions of heroes, of legendary figures in the past. Puranas, however, have a slightly different slant to it. They are equivalent to our encyclopedia, where in the 18 Puranas, they cover a range of topics from astronomy to the cosmology to theology, medicine, and to even philosophy. So it covers quite a big range. And in these in these texts, this is where we get the stories that you would be hearing in a bit, in particular with the yoga asanas. So before we actually dive into these stories per se, in this course that I will be running with in Yoga Plus in the month of September, this lecture is actually to complement the asana practice that we would do on a weekly basis. So it's a 3-week course, meaning we'll meet three times. And in every time we meet, there will be an asana practice, and then it is supplemented with this particular lecture. And so, because this is a truncated sample, I'm just going to go ahead and pretend that we have actually attempted a asana practice in the morning. And so here we are at this point thinking about the sequence that we have done this morning. So the question that I would pose to the participants would be is there somewhat of a integration or a combination of the way we would construct our anatomical cues with the element of the storytelling? So the anatomical cues are cues that you would hear in group classes, but for this particular course, in we are kind of really much more interested in the other aspect of the asana practice, which is the storytelling. How is it integrated? Is it fluid? How does it feed into the whole system of anatomical cues along with the movement itself and the storytelling? And my second question would be, are there any unexpected poses that came about because of these mythological kind of centered asana practice. Okay, that's it. We are going to be looking into breaking down the asana practice into three parts. The first one would be at the start, where it is the grounding element of the grounding portion, in which I would articulate the theme for the week. And the theme for this week, in relation to the myth that we're going to be covering, would be the idea of sacrifice. I've posed the question of thinking of our roles that we play in our lives as parents, as children, as employees, or friends. So these roles would require us to perhaps confront sacrifice in a way which would let you prioritize or think about your priorities in your life. Because as a parent, perhaps the sacrifice that you're willing to take on might be slightly different from the sacrifice that you would take on as an employee in a company. So that was the grounding element that we started off the practice with. And then as we move along, as we move and we sweat through the movements, we went through this peak sequencing, and that culminated in what we are working on in terms of mythology, which is the Hanuman, which is splits. So there were stretches, there were activation in or rather contraction or shortening of your hamstrings, and then finally there was a splits at the end of it. But what's more important is during these movements, I would like you to think about how the storytelling was weaved into it. How did how was the idea of Hanuman weaved into this movement of Hanumanasana? And then finally, we ended with the integration, where we were stretching the anterior part of the legs or the front part of your legs after stretching out the back, right? And that's when we ended the practice, thinking about the whole experience of that 1 hour of movement in terms of, once again, the theme of sacrifice, and also to think about where our body is and what it's capable of doing at this point. So all of that is actually to tie in with the idea or with the story of Hanuman. So let's talk about Hanuman now. Okay, Hanuman is actually a monkey kind of a creature, at least in the mythology of Hinduism, and it was told that at one point when he was really, really, really young. As a child, he was super duper hungry. So as he looked up, he saw this ripe fruit above him, and obviously, as a child, you're hungry. What else can you do? You go and grab it. So the thing here is with Hanuman, he was actually born to a, a mother who is an earthly mother rather, by the name of Anjana, and his father was actually Vayu, which is, if some of you would know, is the king, or rather the lord of the wind, or the god of the wind. So with Vayu, with some sort of a god, kind of godlike blood in him, Hanuman had some sort of superpowers, in the sense that he was able to leap really high up and to grab hold of the fruit instead of asking for help, right? But it turns out that the fruit that he was aiming for was actually the sun. And naturally, with his strength from his legs, he leapt from earth, about to reach for the sun to gobble it up. And then that caught the attention of the god of the gods, Indra. Um, and for Lord Indra, he was quite appalled by this sight, right? He was appalled, angry, and like just mad. So what he did was, instinctively he used his thunderbolt and aimed it to Hanuman, and then it struck Hanuman at his jaw, causing him to fall back down to earth, not just unconscious, but literally dead. So what came to Vayu, the god of the winds, and obviously he wasn't very happy. He was sad. He was grieving. He was angry. He was a lot of things, right? As any grieving parent can tell, one of the things to get, one of the things that you can react to is by going through revenge and taking on revenge, and he did. So because he was the god of the wind and air, he sucked out all the air from Earth, which you would probably can tell it made things worse because everyone on Earth started to die, and it came to a point where it got so escalated that Shiva had to step in and resurrect Hanuman and brought peace. In the process of bringing peace, this Lord Indra, who struck Hanuman with the thunderbolt, realized his mistake and his overreaction. So what he did was as a point, as a gesture of appeasement, he gifted Hanuman with the power, or with the gift of strength. Um, the other gods came by also and gifted him many different traits, which rendered him to be this creature of amazing strength, power, speed, and more importantly, Hanuman became immortal. So you would think that Hanuman, with all these newfound gifts, would help people for essentially to use his gifts for the betterment of his people. But no, he uses gifts to play pranks on others. And then it was only later on in his years that only when he became a devotee of Lord Rama, he used his gifts to save Sita, which is a story that we'll be looking at just in a bit. Okay, so there's this element of cheekiness, kind of like I would say playfulness as well in this Hanuman, in which we kind of like to think about when we actually try to attempt the full splits, which is called Hanumanasana, yeah, inspired by Hanuman. So this Hanumanasana is actually um, inspired by the story of Hanuman trying to save Sita. So, who is Sita? The story, there's a backstory to it, but essentially, um, Hanuman is a devotee of Lord Rama, and Lord Rama's wife is Sita. Okay, so naturally there's this relationship of sorts, right? So Sita was kidnapped by this evil demon called Ravana, and so Hanuman was tasked by Lord Rama to go and save his wife. And they were looking and searching everywhere, and it turns out that Sita was kidnapped and brought to this place called Lanka, which is the present day Sri Lanka. So Hanuman did what he could. He leapt, he spread his legs wide, got into Lanka, and then he saw all these demons and all that. So to prevent himself from getting caught, he shrunk himself to the size of an ant. Some would say an ant, some would say it's a mouse, and he found his way to Sita and told Sita that she would be saved. She would just to hang in there, and then he made his way back to Lord Rama and told Lord Rama the whole situation, and then eventually Lord Rama came to save Sita. So the idea behind this is that Hanuman used his powers and with his strength and flexibility and reach to leap, to cross rivers, to cross oceans, to cross mountains, to find this beautiful, amazing Sita. So, and that is where we are inspired from. This is a story that inspired Hanumanasana. So when we think about Hanumanasana or when we think about splits, right, we want to also note that while it is a physically demanding pose, it is also a pose with a backstory that talks about devotion, that talks about sacrifice, trust, and all these things. If you want to really be approaching yoga asanas with a bit more holistic kind of an approach, then we need to think about how we can embody these um, I guess this learning points or these traits from the story. Perhaps, just perhaps, the next time we do a full split or half splits or whatever splits variations that we do in class, we can think about the idea of devotion to our practice. How dedicated are we into practicing this, and in the process, what sacrifice did we have to uh, that we have to handle or confront to ensure that our practice continues. And finally, we also need to think about the trust that we have for our own body. So sometimes we want to push our bodies to a level where we might not be ready yet. So how can we add on this element of trust in our yoga asana? So essentially, at the end of the day, learning about the mythology, learning about the backstory, and I'm already giving you a slightly truncated version, trying to give you a slightly of an essence of what the course is about. The next time when we do our yoga asana, maybe I could urge you to perhaps explore and understand why we do this pose and what is the story behind it and what do you want to get out of it beyond the physicality, beyond the shape of the pose, and beyond the strength, the flexibility that you can get out of from doing the pose. There is more to it. There's more to asanas. That's what I usually say, than the physicality of it, because all these learning points are all slightly subtler. They are not so in your face, and it's something that you would encounter if you would be a bit more privy to the knowledge of what is what inspired the post. So I hope you kind of got like intrigued by the poses and the stories behind it, because in the course that I'm running with the course I'm running in Yoga Plus, come September, we will uncover and discover so many more of these poses and the stories behind them, and maybe we can perhaps even go to the point where be appreciative of our bodies, and how we can treat our bodies better in doing the poses because we know the stories a lot more. So, having said all of that, thank you for watching this. Thank you for joining me in this short, truncated sample of a lecture. If you'd like to learn more about the course that I'm running on the 4th, 11th, and 18th of September, please feel free to look at the description, check out our Yoga Plus website because we will have a dedicated page for the courses that we'll be running. And so if you find that you have questions, please reach out to me. You can reach out to me in whatever platforms that I'm on, Instagram at Sufyan Thuri. You can also find me via email, and you can also find me on Facebook as well. So there's so many ways to reach out. I hope to hear from you. I hope to see you in the course. Otherwise, I will see you hopefully online and in our yoga class. See you soon.